just because we're talking about it more does not mean that people are still failing to either get the sleep that they need or that they are unable to get the sleep that they need. And those two things are different. One is that you are healthy and you can generate the sleep that you need, but you don't give yourself the opportunity, time, or life, I should say sometimes, because it's sometimes not your choice. Life does not give you the chance to get sleep. And if only you had the chance, you could sleep. That's one version. The second version is, no, I'm giving myself the right opportunity to sleep, but because I'm anxious or because of other issues, I am not able to generate sleep. I suffer from insomnia and sleep problems. So those two things I don't see having changed since, I think this public movement, this increasing movement of sleep conversation came on the table. So in that regard, I'm more pessimistic than I am optimistic. And I think it will only get worse. If you look at rates of insomnia, for example, they're only increasing, they're only escalating. Rates of anxiety disorders, the very same thing. And those two things are intimately intertwined. So I wish my mission was extinguished within the next couple of years because society started sleeping wonderfully well. I don't think that's going to be the case. So I think I've got my work cut out for me to try and help people with better sleep.
Is it so? We're getting worse at sleeping.
I think modernity is making it so much more difficult for us to sleep.
Modernity, what's that?
I think when you think about, we often think about sleep as a biological process, and it very much is. But also it's so environmental as well as biological, meaning when you were to say, how did you sleep last night? Think about all of the external factors that changed it. Well, I had to be up at this time. I had to catch the flight this time. My partner went to bed at this time and she woke up at this time. There was this noise that sort of happened. I'm now sleeping in a hotel room. There are countless externalities, and those externalities are shaped by this thing called the modern world. And in the modern world, if I could really be cynical, and I'm not someone, I'm very optimistic and I'm very non-cynical, but you could argue from a capitalistic standpoint that society does not want you sleeping, because what society wants from a capitalistic point of view is that you're either producing or you're consuming. And when you're sleeping, you're neither producing and you're neither consuming. And so there are lots of ways that I think society and the modern world has conspired, willfully or not, conspiratorially or not, to decrease and try to diminish sleep. In fact, I think the CEO of Netflix several years ago, and I'm sure that YouTube comments will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe his very statement was that we are deciding to commit war against sleep. That was their goal. And it just stunned me that, that we're going to go to war with sleep. We're going to remove you from your sleep. So there are lots of ways in which I think society does not help us. Light is another good example. We are a dark deprived society in this modern era because we're exposed to light. We are not giving ourselves the right temperature cues. We go into an office where it's, 20 degrees, 70 degrees Celsius, whatever it is, stock stable. Then we come home and we regulate our temperature at home to be the same thing. We take on board probably too much caffeine in this day and age, although I am actually an advocate of drinking coffee and I can explain why too. But anxiety, as I said, is a huge issue. All of these things are preventing and classic roadblocks to sleep.
How many of us are getting the sort of recommended daily allowance of sleep as a percentage? Do you know?
It seems to be about 1/3 of most modern civilizations are failing to get the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night.
1/3, so roughly 30, 35%, 33% roughly.
Yeah.
And does that have geographic variance? I.e., in some countries it's worse, in some countries it's better. I'm thinking about the UK versus the US or Japan or whatever.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, let me give numbers to the 3 countries that you described. Here in the United States, the average amount of sleep that people are getting is 6 hours and 29 minutes. In the UK, it's not much better, 6 hours and 49 minutes. Japan was the worst, 6 hours and 22 minutes. Now, to be clear, that's the average. What that means is that there is still a large proportion of that bell-shaped distribution of people getting even less than that amount. Now, there are some countries that you look at that are actually sleeping much better than that. I think Mexico, for example, is doing very well. If you look at Mexico City, people are actually sleeping not too far off from 8 hours. So there is variability, and we can try to understand why, which, by the way, just brings me back while I think about it to your comment of, will my work be done, not from because I'm a scientist and I run a big sleep center at UC Berkeley, but the work I do as hopefully a public advocate for sleep, why I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, is because governments aren't really doing much about it. And I've tried as best I can. And if there is any government out there that listens to this that wants to work with me, I'd be delighted. I don't remember, and maybe you can, but any major first world nation government that has had a public health campaign regarding sleep. And it stuns me, because those same governments have had public health campaigns regarding, eating, regarding smoking, regarding drunk driving, regarding risky behaviors, safe sex,
loneliness,
mental health, suicide. Where is sleep in that equation? And it's such a fundamental ingredient. And in fact, almost all of those things that I've just described have an intimate relationship with sleep. I mean, suicide especially, we're starting to do a lot of work with this, although it's been hard to get funding. But what we found is that insufficient sleep is a precursor to suicide. That sleep disruption seems to predict both suicide ideation, in other words, suicidal thinking, suicide planning, and tragically, suicide completion as well. So if we were to try to have governments create a public health campaign to pull this Archimedes lever on better sleep, there are so many other health benefits. Sleep is the tide that rises all the other health boats. It's almost like it's like a mixing deck in a studio, in those sound studios where you've seen it. And then there's that one button all the way to the end, the white button, sort of that when you move it up, sort of all of the other dials, the sort of the red, yellow, orange, green dials, they all move up at the same time as well. There's this sort of there's like one ring to rule them all. Sleep is that Archimedes lever. So if governments could only execute on that, the health benefits would be manifold in terms of their consequences.